Hope you're staying hydrated. Make sure you go drink some water or grab something for this video because this is going to be an action-packed one. I'm currently drinking from the Vancouver mug because we're going to Vancouver Island in a couple months. I'm really stoked. We're going to make some sweet videos to show you. But today's an important one. Today's a new thing we're starting on the channel, a little mini series we're going to be doing here where I'm going to explain to you how to become, or the basics, the principles of videography, of being the video person, of you making cool content to show to people, whether it's for a hobby or for professional work. I want to help you get there. I want today to teach you, to have us learn together how to expose your image properly. It's an important one. And how we do that is with what we call the exposure triangle. Now I know that sounds kind of lame, a bit too boring, but bear with me, it is the fundamental building block to be able to make cool content and get some cool cinematic footage off of something you're using for video work. So bear with me, it's gonna be good. I have lots of examples. Let's get right to it. Now, let's start with ISO. If you know what ISO stands for, go comment down below. Let me know what you think it stands for. And while you're down there, you might as well hit subscribe and like button. That way we can keep growing the channel and I can keep teaching more people how to use their cameras. But ISO, that's what we're starting off with, and it is an important one. Essentially what the ISO is doing is each pixel on your sensor, it's increasing the gain. Again, sounds kind of scientific. Really what we need to know is when we decide to up our ISO on our camera, our image is going to get brighter. However, that does come with some challenges. For each camera, it has what we call a base ISO, which is your cleanest ISO you can shoot at. So for example, on my A6400, the base ISO is 100. For the A7S III you're currently seeing me on, the base ISO is 640 because I'm shooting on a specific picture profile. Future video, don't need to worry about that. But the base ISO is 640. Your base ISO might change from camera to camera. It doesn't really matter. But what we want to do to get our cleanest image possible is to shoot as close to our base ISO as possible. Let me quickly show you why. So let's take this image of me sitting on my desk saying hi, waving to all of you. And we're pretty dimly lit right now. You can't see me very well. It's going to be more a silhouette. Now, if we go into my camera and we crank the ISO to something like ISO 10,000, wow, you can see me. But there's some weird things going on in the corners. There's some weird little pixels vibrating around there. It's what we call noise. Now, noise is introduced at that point and usually not something we want to see in our clean images. The way I like to run things is I can always add noise and grain in post. So I really want to start with the cleanest image now. Now, we don't really have a solution to fixing this image yet, besides upping and lowering our ISO from 10,000 back to 640. But we're going to come back to the example at the end of the video and resolve it in a fun way, and that way you can understand the exposure triangle that much better. Let's move on to Aperture. Okay, so on your lens, essentially how Aperture is shown is by an f-stop number. So if you look at my lens here, it says f4. For example, the lens I'm shooting on right now says f1.4. Now these are the widest, the most open your aperture can be. When we talk about f-stop numbers, they might seem a little confusing at first. f1.4, f2.8, f4. Hopefully some of those sound familiar to you. Essentially, it's just a range of how wide and how small your aperture gets. So for example, it can go from f1.4 all the way up to f22, where it's super small and not letting in very much light whatsoever. Now, when we're looking at aperture, when we're looking at our f-stop, what we say in industry, kind of the main thing is the speed of your lens. So for example, f1.4 is a very fast lens. f4, not as fast. Now, the main thing you need to understand with f-stop numbers, when you're specifically purchasing a lens, your lens dictates the widest your aperture can get. It dictates the speed of your lens. So for example, this lens here for the A6400, like I said, is f4. The one I'm shooting on is f1.4. This lens can never go down to f1.4. Not possible. It's not built that way. The aperture physically cannot widen that far. But both these lenses can go up to f22 because that's the minimum. The maximum is what's dictated by the lens. And that's really crucial if you're looking to buy a lens. It can make a big difference as well as a pretty big price jump depending what you're looking for. So keep that in mind. Let's go to the example of what we're going to look at here. And it's my little Infinity Iron Man gauntlet from Lego. Love it so very much. But we have two different images here. What you're seeing here though is exactly how the aperture works. Now, we're seeing in the f4.0 image, obviously a little darker, and what's behind the Iron Man gauntlet, a little bit more in focus, a little bit more detailed. And then we're looking at the f2.0, we're seeing the background is actually rather blurry, and it's obviously a brighter image overall. So at f2.0, with the aperture being much wider, it's letting in more light, and therefore, as you can see the image is brighter. However, the other note that we have to take into consideration here is that it also affects your depth of field. Let's look at this from a top-down situation. We'll have a little drawing up there for you. Now, if there's the camera, then me in the background, what's behind me is our depth of field. So if we're shooting at f1.4, I have very shallow depth of field, which means anything past this first line here is going to be pretty much just out of focus. It'll look nice and blurry. But if we increase it to f4, f6, f10, whatever we're going to set it to, our depth of field grows significantly larger, which means it farther behind me still stays more in focus. It's not nearly as blurry. Now that's something to keep in mind if you want to shoot landscape, you want to shoot things, really up close with nothing kind of distracting the viewer from the background. This is where aperture really plays a big role in your creativity and what you're looking for. Now, looking at that depth of field example, a tip that I have for you from the experiences that I've gained from working and doing hundreds and hundreds of interviews at this point is I don't always shoot wide open on my f1.4 lens. Just because it can doesn't mean you should. The depth of field gets so shallow at f1.4 that if they so much as lean forward or back or raise their hands, focus doesn't quite understand where to compensate for that. So I tend to shoot at f2, f2.2. So just keep that in mind. You don't always have to shoot at the widest aperture your lens offers. Aperture affects how much light is entering through your lens, and it affects your depth of field. Those are the two main things I need you to understand about this. For the last one, and by far the easiest one for video specifically, shutter speed. Essentially, your shutter speed is how quickly your shutter is opening and closing within your camera. What that means is we always say it in like 1 over something. So for example, 1/50th, 1/100th, 1/120th. Essentially what that means is you're just going 1 divided by that. That is how many seconds your shutter is opening and closing really, really quickly. So for example, 1/100th shutter speed is every 0.01 seconds, it is opening and closing really, really fast. Now, back in the day when film was all being used, they came up with the rule we call the 180-degree rule. Essentially what that means is for us to get normal motion blur, so everything I do looks as if you were sitting in the room next to me, is we always set our shutter speed to double our frame rate. In the most simplest terms is if I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, my shutter speed is set to 1/50th. You might go, hey Josh, why isn't it set to 1/48th? Most cameras can't do that. So there it's set to 1/50th. And that's it. That's the basics of shutter speed. It is the one part of the exposure triangle that I almost never ever change. But let me show you an example to prove to you that it is our normal motion blur. So you're gonna see me running outside and we're gonna have one set to 1/10th, 1/50th, and 1/100th. And I will not be changing my frames per second. It'll all be shot in 23.976. So let's hit play here. As you see me running across these fields of separate ones, you're gonna notice that in the middle one, the motion blur looks the most realistic anyways. The 1/100th shutter speed is almost a little bit too crisp. It's almost like I'm running, but it seems like every single frame is so detailed. You'll see very little motion blur. But when you look at 1/10th shutter speed, you'll see that it's almost like I'm lagging, like there's like vibrations of me running past. Now, again, some of these are creative decisions. However, for the cleanest images that I like to make, I like to follow that 180-degree rule and specifically show it at 1/50th shutter speed at 24 frames per second. I think that looks the best. So hopefully that example helps you understand motion blur, and let's try to stick with the 180-degree rule. But again, it's your creativity, do whatever you want. I'm just giving you the principles to be able to make those creative decisions for yourself. Let's go back to our first example where I was sitting here waving in the dark and we just cranked the ISO, and we don't want all that noise. We want other things being involved. And so now looking at our knowledge, looking at our foundation of knowledge now, we know we can't change the shutter speed. We could, but we're not going to. We want normal motion blur. So therefore that one set aside, leave that for now, which means we're left with ISO and aperture. Now my aperture is currently set at f4. Which means we could definitely open that up a bit more. So let's knock that up to f2.0 and let's see how it looks. Wow, look at that, significantly better. We get that nice blurry-ish background. I'm clearly, I'm seen. We don't have as much noise. It is far, far better. And that's essentially how you are going to apply the exposure triangle to every video job you ever do. Warning, if you overexpose your image and your highlights are blown out, impossible to recover. And if it's too dark and you try to crank it up in post, they're gonna see a whole bunch of noise. So there are ends of the spectrum. We want you in the middle. We want you to get a clean, well-exposed image that looks great, and therefore you can show it off to your friends, family, and clients and go, wow, this looks awesome. One thing you might be wondering is, Josh, why can't we just add more light? You can always add more light. But there's gonna be situations and places you might be filming at that you can't control the light, and therefore you have to apply your knowledge of the exposure triangle to best fit what's happening and get the best image possible. That's it. That's all I have for this first basics video. I'm just so appreciative of the fact that we've broken 100 subscribers. We hit like 2.5 thousand views in the last video. I appreciate each and every one of you so very, very much. Thank you for that. I encourage you, keep commenting, keep subscribing, keep sharing. I appreciate that so, so very dearly. You'll see a new video next week following this series on another fundamentals, another basics. If there's something you want me to talk about, comment down below. I'd love to do some research and find out some stuff for you and yeah, show you what's happening and teach you some things because I enjoy doing that. So yeah, all right, that's it. See you all next week.